Hey, it's Drybear. After completing all the minion testing that we did a couple days ago to figure out how minions work, we've been working on the stream on the best summoner build that could possibly be made for Necromancer in Diablo 4. And it wouldn't have been possible without all of that testing to understand exactly how things work. But this is going to be the Dark Emperor build built on top of the Ring of Mendeln with darkness damage in order to proc Mendeln as much as humanly possible with insane scaling. Even with a lot of human error on my part, as well as imperfectly rolled gear, we were still pushing up Nightmare 80 and above. So if you've been waiting for a summoner build, this might be the one for you. But first, I only have a couple builds left to do for Necromancer, and then I will have completed my deep dive theory crafting on the Necromancer class with all the mechanics available to it, as well as research to back it all up. So I decided I'd let the community decide what my next class is going to be that I deep dive into and deep theory craft, try and make as many builds as I can and make each of its mechanics come to life and see how far it can push in the Nightmare system. So in the comments and in the description, I've posted a poll for people to vote on stream and also on YouTube to decide what my next class will be. And whichever class wins this poll, I will be deep crafting next in the Season 1 process and playing in Season 1. So if you care about which class I work on next, go ahead and vote on this poll down below. So a couple things about what makes this build function, the challenges that we ran into when pushing it higher, and some of the lessons that we learned. The main focus of the damage is the unique ring of Mendeln, which means that when you hit a lucky hit, not your minions, but if you hit a lucky hit, you have a chance, a 10% chance on a lucky hit to empower your minions to deal a bunch of physical damage. This physical damage we know scales off of your power. It scales off of crit damage. It scales off of crit chance because it can crit. It scales off of vulnerable damage, and it scales off of physical damage as well. And so you can actually get this to be exceptionally high damage. I've had it hit for upwards of 2 million. And if you have anywhere from 9 to 14 minions, multiply that 2 million by each minion because each minion can be empowered, and you do a pretty significant amount of damage. So where I stopped on this build without having to optimize the stats and everything further was about Nightmare 80 is where it was clearing. The damage is very, very good. However, we went through a bunch of iterations to try and figure out how to maximize it and make it feel really good. We started with the same build that I had used for my Thorns Necromancer, which was making a darkness build on Bone Storm, and then using Shielding Storm, the aspect that makes Bone Storm give you a shield. When it gives you a barrier, it gives your minions a barrier, and it will give you and your minions some good tankiness. However, I hit a wall around Nightmare 70, 75 with this build, in that you will run into some mob types, no matter what you do, no matter how much defense you give your minions, where your minions are just going to die. If they're fire enchanted, if they're elemental enchanted, if there's other kind of obstacles with large AoE damage, your minions are going to die. And so what happened is I struggled to push past Nightmare 70 to 75 using Bone Storm because I spent a lot of downtime waiting for my minions to come back, or I had no corpses to resummon them. So we switched to using Army of the Dead instead. And rather than trying to make my minions invincible, I focused primarily on lowering the cooldown of Army of the Dead so that even if my minions die, I replenish them so incredibly fast that it doesn't actually matter, and we're still having high uptime on our army and doing tons and tons of damage. So that was the focus of keeping the minions alive, as even though Mendeln is your damage as the Necromancer, your minions have to be alive to deal that damage in order for you to actually kill anything for that focus. The next thing was to figure out how we could maximize the proc chance of Mendeln, to get Mendeln to proc as much as humanly possible. I pushed my lucky hit chance as high as I could possibly go. I used a couple clever tricks to get it even higher. The problem was that it still has a 10% proc chance base. So even if every single hit that you're hitting is a lucky hit, you still will only be proccing Mendeln 1 in every 10 hits. So an optimization for this that I learned to push this even further was that it's not only your lucky hit chance that matters. It is your lucky hit chance combined with your volume of hits. So the build for Dark Emperor that you're going to see here today is focusing not only on maximizing your lucky hit, but also trying to cleverly increase the amount of hits that your Necromancer is doing so that you can also combine that with your lucky hit chance and proc men down all of the time. In the brief overview before we get into the build, we'll do the skill build, the Paragon, the gear, the stats, the legendaries, the alternatives, the rotation, how to play the build, the elixirs, the gems, everything you need to know about this build. The high level of it is we want to use darkness damage to proc lucky hit, because if you run the unique Greaves of the Empty Tomb, it actually has a unique stat that can exist anywhere else on any other item, which is the lucky hit chance of shadow damage is increased. And we run with either Reap or Hemorrhage as our builder, and then Sever as our spender. We accomplish this higher lucky hit chance by running with Empowering Reaper, an aspect that makes it so when you sever, you have a chance to spawn a blight. We put points into blight, and then we also run aspect of the void, so that when Sever spawns blight will suck in all the enemies, and then they'll all be standing on top of blight. Blight, if you didn't know, has a lucky hit chance every single time it ticks. The lucky hit chance you see listed on the ability is for the full duration. So if blight lasts its whole duration, the lucky hit chance you see on it is what the average lucky hit chance would be for all of the ticks. But it does have a lucky hit chance every single tick, which means that if you use Aspect of the Void and you pull a large group of enemies on top of a blight, every enemy that gets hit by blight, every single tick has a chance to lucky hit. You're also hitting everyone with your Greaves of the Empty Tomb with shadow damage. You're also hitting everyone with your Sever, and all of those can lucky hit and proc men down. And there was another discovery that made this even cooler. It turns out that Aspect of Bursting Bones, which makes Bone Prison explode, has an insanely high lucky hit chance. Now let me show you what I mean. This is Blind Burrow 74, but the lucky hit chance on Bone Prison exploding with Bursting Bones is enough to almost fully reset its own cooldown every time you cast it. So if you look at this, when you put down Bone Prison and then cancel Bone Prison, if it ever expires, it'll explode. And then when it explodes, each of the segments that explodes has a lucky hit chance. If you have lucky hit chance on your gear, you get insane amounts of lucky hits. You can see in this clip, if we back up a little bit, you can see that when I put the Bone Prison down on the targets here, and then cancel it immediately, it'll explode, and all of those hits will have lucky hits. And with Decrepify, look how much, so this is before. So you see I have 16 seconds left on Army of the Dead, 13 seconds left on my Bone Prison. My Bone Prison cooldown is like 14 seconds right now. When I cancel it, right after canceling it, when it explodes, you can see I now have 5 seconds left on Army of the Dead and 2 seconds left on Bursting Bones. And then I just put down Bone Prison again, and then I cancel it, and then it resets its cooldown, and I put Bone Prison down again, and then I cancel it, and it resets its cooldown. And this is lowering the cooldown of Army of the Dead at the same time, so you're constantly getting that reset. On top of that, there is actually a grace period where you can't cancel Bone Prison right after it's been put down. You have like a little bit of a global cooldown there. And what I found is that inside of that 1 second window between casting Bone Prison and canceling Bone Prison, you can fit 1 or 2 severs into that. So what you do is you spam Sever and Bone Prison on the same keys over and over and over, and you'll shoot out a Sever, put down a Bone Prison, shoot out a Sever, detonate the Bone Prison, shoot out a Sever, put down a Bone Prison. And you're just going like this, just pumping left and right, lowering the cooldown, proccing men down, doing tons and tons of damage, and also applying vulnerable. And then if there's any enemies inside Bone Prison, you're getting a bunch of essence back, and all of that is working well into its own build. I had some people asking me yesterday on stream, why is Bone Prison in this build? Where did the Golem go? Why don't you have other options here? The primary reason is to increase the lucky hit chance as well as the volume of hits. And between your builder, your spender, both of your spenders with Sever proccing Blight and both having shadow damage for lucky hit, on top of the Bursting Bones lucky hit, spamming all of these at once gives you a high hit count, and each of these hits can lucky hit, and you're just getting men down out of all of this. The reason I worked Golem out of the build is because it only amounts to 1 men down hit versus the 9 to 13 you can get from your skeletons. So really, I just wanted to have that 1 skill slot to get rid of that 1 hit of men down in order to get higher lucky hit chance and proc chance for these characters. And the survivability of the minions matters a lot less once we have Army of the Dead on a very short cooldown, because you're always constantly replenishing them. When it comes to builder, you want to run either Reap or Bone Splinter or Hemorrhage. I think Reap is the tankiest, but it does mean you have to get closer to the enemies in order to use it. I have actually found great value out of using Hemorrhage for one main reason, in that hemorrhage itself, not only can you fortify yourself with it and generate blood orbs which heal you, but it also has a very high lucky hit chance. And what's cool about enhanced hemorrhage is that when you pick up a blood orb, your next hemorrhage will hit all targets in an area. My hemorrhage right now is like a 53% lucky hit chance. So when I have enhanced hemorrhage after a blood orb and I suck all the enemies in with blight and I throw out the hemorrhage, however many enemies are there, hemorrhage will hit every single one of them with a 53% lucky hit chance. And so we'll get free men downs out of that as well. So combine hemorrhage, enhanced hemorrhage with sever, with blight, with bone prison. All of these put together give you a very high proc chance on men down. There's another nice benefit to bone prison that really helps circumvent one of the problems with minions in Diablo 4, in that many enemies are programmed to focus you out and focus fire the Necromancer over your minions. It doesn't matter how many minions you have, certain mobs are focused on killing you instead. However, as you can see in this clip, if you trap one of these enemies in the bone prison with your minions, since they can no longer path to you, they will be forced to switch target to an available target, which is your minions. So when you get chased down by the fallen foot soldiers, the spiders that chase you down, the wolves, the werewolves, all of these mobs that are focused on chasing you over your minions, you can simply trap them in with your minions. They'll change target and you can sit at range with sever if you'd like. I also have down in the description and in the comments a link to my one sheet, which has all of the powers and legendary slots, as well as the stat priority, the Paragon glyphs, the gems that you'll be using, the best elixirs that you can use for this build, incense, sigil affixes, and some notes about how to play the build in general, which we'll go over in just a little bit in this video. But I have this link down below, as well as my D4 builds link, which has the full Paragon, the full skill build, and all of that. All right, let's run through the skill build really quick and talk about what's important here in this setup that we have. We talked a little bit about the builders already, but I think that hemorrhage is probably the safest and most viable. You can see that I have 52% lucky hit chance on hemorrhage. Enhanced hemorrhage hits every single enemy in an area. So if you pull everyone in with blight, you'll be able to get some nice procs off of this. You could also run bone splinters with might from a distance and then run with the chance to get crit chance. Crit chance is how you proc the blight from sever. So this can be useful as well. And if you're running into a lot of issues surviving, you can also use reap for the damage reduction on it and the free chance to spawn a corpse. All of those are viable options. You can pick and choose which ones make the most sense for you. The only one I wouldn't really use is Decompose, mainly because its lucky hit chance relative to how many enemies it hits is pretty low, and it also means that you have to stand still to use it, which is very, very dangerous. For skills, we also want to pick up both Blight and Sever. The reason we do this is because we'll have Sever on our bar as part of our build here down at the bottom, but we will not have Blight on our bar, and we know that we're going to proc Blight from our empowering Reaper aspect, and anytime you proc an ability, it will inherit whatever stats and modifiers you have on it in general. So when we proc Blight with points into Blight, it will slow the enemies that are inside of it, and also give you and your minions 15% damage to enemies within Blight. We care most about you because that's going to affect your men down, but it gives a little bit of damage to your minions as well, which is pretty cool. We're also going to get the vulnerable cast from Sever. With enough attack speed and essence generation, you get plenty of essence with this, which means you spam, and you're applying vulnerable. We're also applying vulnerable with bone prison. So we have plenty of vulnerable procs up there and makes our men down better. We like corpses because it allows us to heal our minions and get our flesh eater legendary node passive. So lucky hit to create a corpse is very useful for us. We come down here and we do want to pick up Grim Harvest, which gives us essence when we're healing our minions through the raised skeleton ability, and also getting increased damage every time we consume a corpse, which is useful. We also really want HP for our warriors and mages so that they don't die as easily. Super important. And then we actually max out Bone Prison. I found this to be very helpful in hard content. At level 5 on Bone Prison at my level, each segment of the Bone Prison has 10.2 thousand health, which means that if you want to leave it up to trap enemies, to block movement, if there's a dangerous elite that's coming your way and you want to prevent them from reaching you or force them to fight a minion, you can leave the Bone Prison up for a few seconds before detonating it in order to keep that going, and it gives you a way to distract enemies, block projectiles. It's a very flexible ability, and putting points in it gives us more life on it as well. We also want to get essence per enemy inside, so if you wait for the Blight proc off of our Sever and then cast Bone Prison, you'll get a ton of essence for everyone that's grouped up, and then we will also apply vulnerable to enemies inside of the bone prison. We're going to pick up close damage reduction and close damage, which is useful for when we get close. You can also run Death's Reach if you wanted. You'll be doing most of your damage at range anyways, but this just gives you the damage reduction to dangerous enemies. Amplify, because we're going to be decrepifying everyone, so it's a free 9% scalar for damage. And then we pick up Decrepify down to Abhorrent Decrepify, which means that any lucky hit that we trigger on a decrepified enemy has a chance to reduce our cooldowns by 1 second. This is crucial for keeping high uptime on Army of the Dead and also getting Bone Prison procs as well. Then we get the extra life for our skeletal mages, so they stay alive longer. We come down into the Macabre tree and we pick up movement speed on Darkness. This one's just kind of free. You can also pick up Necrotic Carapace if you want, because you'll be able to do that with, like, especially if you're running Reap, you can get some good value out of that for Fortify, or you can just run Chance to Stun, which is useful for dealing with bosses. It's higher stagger. You can stagger the boss and also help stun dangerous enemies while you're moving about. Coming down to the final tree, we're going to pick up Army of the Dead and then fully max it out, which means it has a chance to drop a corpse, and it has a chance to, it will raise your skeletal warriors and mages, which what we really want from this ability is this, is that when we proc Army of the Dead, it'll replenish any missing skeletons, and we do this often to get this. Also note that the full duration of Army of the Dead has a 95% lucky hit chance with my current gear. This is for the full duration of Army of the Dead, but you can actually get several procs of lucky hit every single time you pop Army of the Dead, and if you have high enough density, you will have Army of the Dead up basically all the time, constantly triggering lucky hit over and over and over and over again, which is cool. We pick up Inspiring Leader just to get a little bit of attack speed. Since we cast so many things, the attack speed helps a lot. We want the healing for our minions from Bonded and Essence, and the defense for our minions through Death's Defense. We come down and we pick up Shadow Blight. We do a lot of darkness damage. The 10% damage bonus to us is very strong. And we also have damage reduction from enemies that have shadow damage over time. And we have higher lucky hit chance from Shadow from our Greaves, which is super great, as well as our main offensive aspect is going to be Blighted, which when you deal damage to a target that has Shadow Blight on them, you have you stack up to 10 stacks. When you get to 10, you get up to 120% bonus damage. This does affect Mendeln, so you want to be using this to stack that up really, really fast. And that's where the main value of your damage is going to come from. So that's why we put all those together. Then we can go over the aspects and the stat priorities that you want for this build. So this one is very heavily optimized for high-end content, but you can swap some of these options out if you are doing Helltide or equal level or just some fast farming. Let's go through what the pieces are here. For Helm, we want cooldown reduction, basic skill attack speed, max life, and percent armor. You can also swap out for another defensive on this as well, but you want, at the very least, cooldown reduction on your Helm, cooldown reduction on your Amulet, and cooldown reduction on your Offhand in order to maximize the uptime of Bone Prison as well as Army of the Dead. For the Helm, I like putting Void on this. This is the one that makes it so Blight pulls enemies in. You want this because all the enemies standing on top of Blight gives you your damage amp from Blight, but also gives you a much higher chance to proc Lucky Hit because they're all ticking on Blight at the same time. For chest and legs are always defensive focused. You have to have this much defense in order to push higher nightmares to survive. So for chest, I like getting Might for the damage reduction after using your primary. Damage reduction close, armor, or damage reduction distance, and then max life. Damage reduction distant is a stat that I've been putting more on as of late, and this is primarily to combat things like corpse bows at high level nightmare. You walk in a room and all of a sudden you get one shot from across the room. Having damage reduction distant helps a lot. You can roll it on chest, legs, and amulet primarily. And this gives you a nice way to survive getting smacked in the face by a high damage ranged target. And it, going from being one hit to 2 hit helps a lot in surviving those instances. You can also run physical damage on your chest if you're doing a farming build, but I would recommend focusing legs and chest always on primarily defense, because that's where most of your stats are going to come from. For gloves, you have 2 options here. You want to get either Viscous, which gives you 2 extra mages, which means 2 extra procs of Mendeln, or you can run Unyielding Commander. I think if you're just normally farming or playing Helltide, you want Viscous. It's more procs of Mendeln. Unyielding Commander doesn't really give you any more damage. The attack speed of your minions doesn't really matter that much. It is a small optimization because they can reposition faster and recover from attacks faster. The main reason you would want Unyielding Commander for high-level Nightmare is if you walk into a room and there's an elite with, say, fire enchanted, or there's a big AoE, puzzle like Plague Bearer or Poison Enchanted on the ground, where they're going to be dying from AoE damage. Unyielding Commander, for its duration for Army of the Dead, gives you 90% damage reduction on your minions. And while, yes, you lose 2 procs of Mendel when you're not running Viscous, that 90% damage reduction means that your minions have a much higher chance of surviving Fire Enchanted long enough to kill the elite and then move on to the next pack. So for difficult content, you can run Unyielding Commander, and then for easier content, I want to make sure that you maximize the number of minions that you have, so you want to run Viscous. And then for gloves, we want lucky hit chance, crit damage, and then lucky chance to heal. You can swap out lucky chance to heal. I like having this on at least your gloves, if not both your gloves and your shield. Because you have such a high lucky hit chance, you can roll up to about 1300 health per proc of this. And if you have it on your shield as well, that's 2600 health that you can be procking constantly. It saves you potions and keeps you healthy in moderate damage situations, and can be very useful. For pants, we want Disobedience, and we stack this at range from Empowering Reaper, from Sever, as well as the Greaves of the Empty Tomb, which does stack up your Disobedience. It's super nice. And then we want damage reduction close, damage reduction distance, and armor on pants to keep ourselves alive. For boots, we run Greaves of the Empty Tomb, which is a unique, which means you can't change the stats on it. But luckily, there's some good stats on there for us. It gives us intelligence and essence cost reduction, which is kind of nice. Not the best stats for us, but still nice. Damage reduction for targets that have shadow damage over time on them, which is excellent because most targets will from our shadow damage, which gives us more free damage reduction. But the main stat that we like about Greaves of the Empty Tomb is the lucky hit with shadow. This means that when you're doing darkness damage or shadow damage, any shadow ability has a higher lucky hit chance than normal, and it can roll, I believe, up to about 15%. In the build that you see me playing, I have currently a very medium roll. Like I have 9% lucky hit chance with shadow damage. It can go up to 15%. So if I had, 7 or 6% more lucky hit from shadow just on this, if I had better rolls on everything, I would be proccing so much more. And it makes a huge difference in your ability to deal damage that way. For your weapon, I think you want to run main hand, offhand for this, for the reason that you can get a shield, which gives you another defensive aspect. So Blood Getters is the aspect that gives you 2 more warriors, skeletal warriors. This gives you 2 more procs of Mendeln, so more damage. You can get block. The block is inherited by your minions, which makes them tankier, which is nice. And it also means that it can roll defensive stats like damage reduction. So you can get damage reduction, crit chance, lucky hit chance, and cooldown reduction on your shield with Blood Getters for 2 extra warriors. And then for your main hand, you want to run a wand because wands roll naturally with a lucky hit chance on them. Upgraded at the ancestral level, you get 15% lucky hit chance just from your wand. This is super crucial for giving you all of your resets on Decrepify and proccing your men down. Remember, lucky hit chance is pretty equivalent to the damage you deal because you only deal serious damage when you lucky hit. Then for wand, it's pretty flexible, but you want to look for vulnerable damage, crit damage, close damage, and then damage to crowd control or damage to stun. The damage to stun is only if you run Corpse Tendrils, which is an alternate option for this build. I think Corpse Tendrils also has a high chance to proc, but it's a little bit less usable because after 2 Corpse Tendrils, enemies stop getting CC'd by it, which means they spread out and it's not as useful, and it won't hit as many targets if you're using it. But if you do run Corpse Tendril, stun damage is going to be your best friend. For Amulet, we like running damage reduction, cooldown reduction, damage reduction close, and then crit chance versus injured. Remember, for Empowering Reaper, it only procs Blight when Sever crits. So you can actually run crit chance versus injured on your gloves or on your shield or on your amulet, and this rolls much higher value than it does on the normal crit chance. So you can end up getting 30, 40% more crit chance against a target that's injured, and if you're hitting a whole bunch of mobs, 1 or 2 of them is injured, and you crit and you proc a Blight, it'll pull all of them in. New mobs will become injured. You keep proccing Blight. It gives you more lucky hit chance. It turns out to be quite useful. I like running Empowering Reaper on my amulet as well, by the way, because it gives you a higher proc chance as well as the bonus damage, which doesn't matter as much. We just want to be proccing Blight enough to be dealing with the 3-second cooldown on the Blight proc. This is going to happen every 3 seconds. So you want to be proccing Blight about every 3 seconds if you can. And the 30% crit chance, 30% chance to spawn Blight versus 20% makes a pretty big difference. So I like having this here. Alternatively, you can also run like Viscous here for your mages, which gives you 1 extra mage or 1 extra warrior if you'd like. But this is a super nice way to get more procs out of your Mendeln. Then we'd run Mendeln, which has fixed stats on it, of course, but it does have lucky hit, which is useful for us. And then, of course, you want to get the highest roll of stat available for Mendeln. For me, I am running a 16,364. It goes up to 17,225, and this was hitting for multi-millions per minion. So you can get this up even higher than the one I have now, so it gets even stronger from here. For your other ring, run Bursting Bones, which makes the Bone Prison explode with high lucky hit chance, and you run this on the ring. And you also want to run Lucky Hit, Vulnerable Damage, Crit Chance, and then you can either run Crit Damage or Physical Damage. Both of these will scale up the damage of your Mendeln procs, and you can, if it's hard to find a perfect ring, you can swap between those two stats. For gems, we run Topaz for damage reduction with CC. If you're running Hemorrhage, you can actually probably run Sapphire here for damage reduction while fortified if you're using Hemorrhage enough. For weapon, we like Crit Damage Vulnerable, and then for your gems, you want Armor on them, just for the higher damage reduction. For elixirs, there's a Helltide specific elixir that gives lucky hit chance. So this is the Combatant Fortune. It is a very nice elixir. It's very powerful. It gives you lucky hit chance 30% for 30 minutes. And I use this for pushing nightmare dungeons. These can drop, I believe, in nightmare dungeons and from Helltide chests. So be doing your Helltides, clear nightmares, and save these for difficult nightmares to push. But you can actually get lucky hit chance elixirs as well. Unfortunately, you just can't craft these. So these are some of the best ones that you can get in general. And there's also going to be a crit strike chance elixirs, which are very useful, which means you proc more blights as well. And then for incense, armor, resistance works great. For bad sigil affixes, suppressor is really bad for minions right now. There's a couple bugs with suppressor. You'll notice this when playing this build, but sometimes minions end up in the suppressor bubble and they still are doing no damage. And sometimes they're outside the bubble and they won't move. There's tons of problems with suppressor. You'll find that if an enemy has suppressor, they take like 10 times longer to kill with minions because majority of your minions are just bugging out and can't deal damage. So hopefully they fix that in the next patch, but it's definitely one of the ones you want to avoid. Fire Enchanted is the minion killer. It is the most dangerous affix for minions. They get absolutely obliterated by Fire Enchanted, no matter how much damage reduction you give them, which is rough. Physical Resist prevents us from doing Mendeln damage. Melee Defender, same thing. Monster Elemental damage, so like Shadow damage over time, Poison damage over time, Cold damage bonus. Resistances for minions are generally just low, so it's hard to deal with these. And lastly, Blood Blister is a big problem. With minions, it is hard to focus fire primary important target. So if you have an enemy that has an aura, or if there's a Blood Blister, getting your minions to focus fire that specific target is very irritating and tough. So just be aware that you probably, if it's a difficult sigil, you want to avoid Blood Blister. It is a huge pain to deal with. You may even need to swap out your builder for like Blood Mist so that you can avoid the explosion of Blood Blister just because it is that painful. And then for notes, I have be aggressive. Your Mendeln won't proc from your minions. It has to proc from you. So if you're not being aggressive, you're not stacking your disobedience, you're not procking Mendeln. So make sure you are attacking enough to deal damage. For the rotation, make sure that maintain Decrepify on all targets. This is how you reset your cooldowns, so keep this up at all times. Pop Army the Dead, because again, you want to be resetting your cooldown all the time to get value out of it. And cast Sever at a distance to stack up Disobedience through your Greaves of the Empty Tomb, as well as your Sever hits. And then when you get a proc of Blight, and it pulls all enemies in, refresh the Decrepify, buff yourself by doing Raised Skeleton ×5 to heal minions, and stack your Flesh Eater buff, which gives you more damage. It scales your Mendeln. And then when everyone's stacked up, cast Bone Prison and then dismiss it immediately to detonate it. It should reset its cooldown or get pretty close to it, depending on how many mobs are there. And then you can just keep spamming that and alternating with Sever and Bone Prison over and over and over. And then if you're running Hemorrhage, use Hemorrhage when you're low on Essence and you didn't get good procs off of your Bone Prison. Proc Mendeln, and then of course, maintain your Might buff at all times, so you have your damage reduction. For Paragon, let's quickly run through this so that we're aware of what's going on in here. This one, I would run the maximum number of boards because your biggest power jumps are going to come from glyphs in this build. So we come up through here. You want to pick up as much crit damage as you possibly can along the way. This is going to affect your Mendeln in a very positive way. You want to pick up as many global % damage scalers that you can, like Flesh Eater, which gives you an X% increased damage when you consume 5 corpses. This is why we spam Raised Skeleton 5 times before we start our combo. So we're getting bonuses there. So we're gonna come up here into the first one and pick up a control glyph. This is gonna work all the time. because we have Decrepify slow, and then if we run with other CCs, or if the CC through darkness, you get even more damage from this. This is a super nice scaler. It gives you some free damage scaling. We want to pick up the damage, the crit damage here as well, which helps a lot. And then we want to pick up corporeal as well. This gives you increased physical damage. It scales your men down and makes your minions a little bit stronger as well. And it also means that you get extra armor if you put it inside of the Scent of Death build here, which is an extra 200 armor from just this little area here, which is very, very cool. We're going to pick up Scent of Death. This gives us damage reduction when there's close corpses, and then damage when there is not. And most of the time, there'll be close corpses because we're not consuming them so much that we'll be dealing with it. Plus, we have high lucky hit, so we're going to spawn those a lot. For stats along the way, by the way, Dex is actually super useful because it gives you crit chance, which means you proc more blight. And then also Intelligence is super useful as well because it just gives you a % skill damage scaler, which will affect all of your abilities. To the right here, you want to pick up your Flesh Eater. This gives you your damage bonus after consuming corpses. We also want to get the crit damage along the way, super useful as we grab these nodes here. Come down and use the Exploit glyph. This is a great spot for Exploit because it has so many dex nodes around it. This gives us vulnerable damage and damage scaling against targets that we hit that are vulnerable, which gives us some nice bonuses there as well. We cut over to the left and we go into the Cult Leader board. This one is required because it is the best place to use the Dead Razor glyph. This spot for glyphs has minion damage reduction in it. And you can also get this piece here, which is Dead Razor, which increases the amount of damage and damage reduction for minions that you get from your Dead Razor glyph on this. You can actually get a lot more here. You can even see that you can get even more damage reduction for minions. I was messing with my build here, so if we swap out some decks, we can actually get this to proc, which is double the amount of damage reduction from this glyph, plus these here. It gives you a ridiculous amount of damage reduction for your minions, and it helps quite a lot. We don't care about minion damage because we are the ones that are sourcing the damage, so that's what matters most. And we're going to come up here into Bloodbath because we have some nice nodes here, and it's a good spot for the Territorial glyph. This gives us close damage, so if you're using Reap or you're up against targets, you can get some really nice damage out of this and get some bonus there. But primarily we get this because damage reduction against close enemies. It means when you're facing snakes in Witchwater or spiders in Blind Burrows or the Night Penitents that charge you, that do close damage all the time, this means that you can survive those hits a lot easier, which is super nice. And we can also get a little bit of intelligence here and some crit chance very easily as well. Then coming down from these boards, at the very bottom, you have a couple options. I think one of your best choices is just going with Hulking Monstrosity, not because we're using a golem, but because this glyph spot here is actually pretty dense in some useful stats. And as a final glyph, you can run something like Gravekeeper, which gives you damage for every close corpse, which makes you do even more damage. Again, any glyph that gives you a global damage % scaler is going to affect your men down, which gives you a whole bunch of bonus damage. And that's the Dark Emperor build, maximizing lucky hit, shadow damage, and proccing men down as much as humanly possible. You want to use Sever to gather up minions using procs of Blight. Try to take advantage of any enemies that are standing on Blight with as much bonus damage as you possibly can. Keep using Army of the Dead to keep your minions replenished, and then every 5 to 6 seconds, make sure you're consuming 5 corpses to heal your minions and proc the Priest effect, as well as giving yourself the Flesh Eater bonus, which is a big source of damage for you. Make sure all enemies are always decrepified. It gives damage reduction for you and also gives a slow for control bonus damage on crowd control, and it lowers your cooldowns, which is a big part of being able to proc men down as much as you possibly can. You also want to be using your main ability, or your builder, whatever you decide to go with. Reap if you're doing more damage reduction, Hemorrhage if you want more lucky hit, and to play at a safer distance. And then you're going to be using those to generate essence, but also to maintain your might bonus. If you're playing for a little bit safer content like Helltide or Lower Nightmare that you're just speed farming, you can run with more offensive legendaries, a focus offhand with another offensive legendary, and get even more bonus damage. Inner Calm also works great with this build. If you're not in huge danger, you can stand still and spam, and that damage scaler will work on men down, making men down hit even harder, which is really, really cool. It is true that you still want to be moving around a lot and kind of dealing with it that way. And again, you will run into issues with priority target management like Blood Blister or Aura minions, because your minions are just hard to direct and control, and your proc chances are random at their core. And you also will run into trouble with Suppressor. There is a bug right now where Suppressor I don't know what it is. I can't figure it out. Either your minions are just like if one minion's outside and all of them are inside, it treats them all as if they're inside or outside and they do no damage, but it takes significantly longer to kill any elite that has suppressor with minions. Getting them in the bubble and keeping them there and making sure they're dealing damage is a bit of a chore, but hopefully they fix that and clean that up for later. So that is the Dark Emperor build. I hope you guys enjoy. This one's actually pretty powerful, and I think one of the best summoner builds you can make for Necro in the game right now. If you found value in the video, leave a like down below. Leave a comment for the algorithm so this video gets seen by more people. And if you have any questions or comments, you can check me out on my live stream. I'd be happy to chat with you. If you enjoyed yourself today, leave a like down below. You can support me and my work on Patreon and view Patreon exclusive content. Link in the description. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one.